Well Studio, we thank you for joining us. We welcome now Jim Leggette, Lecturer of Economics at Mississippi State University. Hey, Jim.
Morning. How you doing?
Doing fantastic. We were just discussing in the last segment, we got fresh inflation data this morning. It came in a little better than expected. The markets reacted in a positive fashion as a result. And I was just talking about kind of the state of our fiscal situation. I'm not optimistic that we're going to get down to the Fed's 2% target. And you keep seeing economists and analysts and those involved in the wealth management industry who are responsible for predicting the activities of the Fed and making appropriate investments and calls for their customers. They keep pushing back the possibility of rate cuts as a result. They feel like inflation is just stickier than we thought it would be. What are your thoughts?
I would agree. And I think, we certainly like the idea of dangling interest rate cuts there because there are an awful lot of industries that are dependent on that. But I think it would be, I'll go ahead and say everything, irresponsible. It's kind of like you've got 90% of where you need to be, and then you're not willing to grind it out to get where you need to be. And granted, I think part of it's election politics, and part of it is we as a species are an impatient lot. No, you just about anything you can think of, and as you know, any successful project, you got to grind it out. There's a point in that project we'd rather move on to something else.
It feels like the Fed was late to the game before they ever got around to accepting that, this thing is more than just transitory. Late to the game and perhaps a little premature in stopping the rise of rates, the increase in rates.
I would agree. I think, and maybe we're asking, of course, it's easy for you and I to criticize because we don't have to make that decision. But I think the real challenge is independent of the people is you're almost asking a human to do something that a human can't do. Yeah. Meaning you need a perfect, view. I think you use a baseball analogy. You can be in the left field at Duty Noble and somehow you know how to coach the team better than the guy there, or you're 350 feet away and you can call the strikes better. But I think, it's yogiism, the future. Predictions are hard, particularly about the future.
Yeah.
And I think, and in the critiques that disciples of Milton Friedman make is you're not going to get it right, and you're more likely to mess it up. So don't mess with something you don't understand.
Well, Fed Chairman Powell's made it very clear the target's still 2%, and it's the typical sort of non-committal rhetoric. Last time he spoke, that we're watching all the data and we're taking into consideration all the inputs to guide our actions on interest rates. But one of the problems he's got, Jim, you and I think have touched on this before, is his boss over there in the White House is kind of at odds with him from a fiscal policy perspective. So he's being charged to stabilize pricing, as you know, one of the two components of the Fed's mission. Optimize employment, stabilize pricing. That's essentially what what guides them in their policy making decisions. But he's got a boss over there that doesn't have any interest in addressing our spending. Our deficit, you've probably seen this, we've already borrowed $500 billion halfway into the fiscal year. So we're on a run rate to hit $1 trillion of borrowing. The second largest line item in the federal government's budget is now interest on the debt, second only to Social Security.
Yeah, and I think the point you're making is fiscal policy, which is Congress and the president, and monetary policy, which is the Fed, are not in sync. And if Powell was sitting here with a whiskey with us, he'd say, "You boys at Congress are making my job awfully hard because he's got to finance. What did you just say? Or he doesn't have to, but you can't just go borrow $30+ trillion every year and not expect it to make a difference."
Right. And that's where we are. And so your outlook, a lot of folks are calling for Mr. Trump to retake the White House, and they're anticipating and optimistic about him implementing the same economic policies he did in his first term, which I think most people would agree created a healthy economic environment, both from a business perspective and a consumer and individual perspective. But it's a little different task this time around, is it not, Jim? When you're sitting on this debt, until you start reducing the debt, this interest tab is going to stay where it is at $1 trillion a year. It's going to actually continue to increase because we keep borrowing more money, and the only way you can get to the debt is if you balance the budget, and we're not likely to do that.
We hadn't done that since 98 or 99. And that was a quirk in the sense that you were running the dot-com boom. You and I could balance that budget.
Yeah.
But I think it is a different thing because he did the tax cut, which I think was reasonably good. I would have preferred more permanent stuff as opposed to things you had to do to make it palatable. I'm really talking about business taxes. But the $6 trillion or so spending from the pandemic was still addressing that, and Trump wasn't necessarily a master of fiscal discipline either, and the pandemic just kind of threw all that off. Well, nobody is, because incentives are stacked against you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'm sort of cautioning folks that don't expect that if Mr. Trump is reelected, he gets in office, that you see the price of gas go down by $1 or so in the near term. That's not likely to happen. We're not likely to see this inflation moderate and push down to the 2% level. Don't think that's going to happen. We're not going to balance the budget, and we're not going to chip away at the debt consequently.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, you mentioned gas, because people seems to resonate. Low gas prices, while you love them, aren't necessarily a good thing. Because remember 4 years ago when nobody was doing anything?
Yeah.
And it was $1.50, and on the futures market, oil producers were actually paying people to take crude oil because they couldn't afford to store it. So while you've seen the signs that say, I look to Facebook for insights or sound economic analysis, but hey, it was $1.50 and now it's $4. But yeah, $1.50 was a crummy economy, so that's not so good. And I think the proper expectations or success is prices stop going up. It's not going down, because then you get the Great Depression again.
Yeah, it seems like that, and that's kind of what the Fed wanted to see is some significant job loss, a tick up of unemployment. People have less money in their pocket to spend, and that would curb inflation. That's really not happening. I haven't seen any just massive layoffs or significant increase in the unemployment rate that the Fed, I think, was looking for. It's crazy that that's a bad news is good news sort of scenario, at least for those that are working.
And maybe there's, just be obvious 15 years from now, maybe there's some resiliency in the economy that we don't understand. And maybe what's going on, something fundamentally is changing. And of course, the people who are managing it are basing decisions on what happened yesterday. Yeah. And maybe there'll be something obvious, because periodically, and we talked about, I think last time we got how the waves of innovation are going faster and faster. And what worked in 1990 may not be the same economy. Or the fact that you're not even doing this.
Totally agree. So before we go, I think we're setting up for an epic battle in the Congress on the expiration of the individual provisions of the tax cuts. Well, how do you see that playing out?
Probably, knowing the rhetoric is they'll try to roll back the business tax cuts, which would be a bad idea, and then they'll probably try to whack the high earners again, because that's where the money is, and that's why I think it's awfully important, whoever the president is, that people who actually care about fiscal discipline control both houses.
Yeah. Yeah, it just feels like we're likely to have somewhat divided government, and even if we don't, we're not going to have 60 votes either party in the Senate to overcome the filibuster. Man, you can just see a lot of horse trading going on this deal. I give you this, if you give me that. That's kind of what I sort of forecast.
And it
Always
would be a good analogy for folks to look at during the recession of 2001, something like that. George W. Bush had some tax cuts, and they I'll say cheated to make it like 10 years, and it sunsets. And they basically used the same thing for this. And we know how that played out. And it's not unreasonable to believe that the script is the same.
Yep. Well, we got to go. Appreciate you coming on, Jim. You and I are going to be talking about D-Day next month. You've been doing a lot of research on that. We'll talk some more, I'm sure, before then. Thanks for coming on. See you later.
50,000 words and counting.
Unbelievable.